Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're really diving into a pivotal time reconstruction right after the Civil War. You shared some fantastic documents outlining these, well, really different plans for putting the country back together.
Absolutely. It's fascinating stuff. We've got Lincoln's 10% plan, then the much harder line from the radical Republicans in the Wade Davis bill, and then Andrew Johnson's approach.
And the 13th Amendment sort of sits underneath all of this, doesn't it?
It's fundamental, yeah. Essential context for everything that follows.
Okay, so let's start with Lincoln. December 1863, the war is not even over, and he's already putting out this 10% plan. Seems focused on speed.
That was definitely a major goal for him, speed and reconciliation. He wanted the southern states back in the fold quickly.
So the plan itself, pretty straightforward.
Relatively, yeah. A general pardon for most Southerners, except the really high-up Confederates. And the key part, only 10% of the 1860 voters in the state had to swear allegiance to the U.S.
Just 10%.
10%.
Yeah.
And they had to pledge to support emancipation, the end of slavery. Once that happened, the state could start drafting a new constitution.
Okay, 10%. It still strikes me as, well, low. Was that controversial at the time? What was the thinking there?
It was definitely controversial. Lincoln likely figured a lower bar would speed things up, maybe make accepting emancipation a bit easier for the South. Less resistance, perhaps.
Makes sense from a pragmatic view, maybe, but who could actually vote under this plan?
Good point. Still limited to white males, 21 and older. That's a crucial detail.
Right. So how did other Republicans react? I imagine not everyone was thrilled with this leniency.
And not at all. You had moderate Republicans who were kind of on board with the focus on reconciliation. But the radical Republicans, they were strongly opposed.
Why? What was their main issue?
They saw it as way too soft, like just forgiving traitors, basically.
Hmm.
And crucially, it didn't offer strong guarantees for the rights, the civil rights of the formerly enslaved people.
They wanted more fundamental changes.
Exactly. They believed the South needed a complete overhaul, not just a quick patch-up job, which leads us right into their response.
The Wade Davis bill, February 64, this sounds like a direct counterpunch to Lincoln.
It absolutely was. Figures like Senator Benjamin Wade, Representative Henry Winter Davis, they were adamant. Confederate leaders needed punishment.
And what about the freedmen?
They believed formerly enslaved people deserved full political rights, equality with white citizens, and they saw a strong federal role as necessary to protect black citizens and build a free labor economy.
Okay, so Wade Davis versus 10%. What were the big differences in the actual requirements?
Huge differences. Instead of 10%, Wade Davis demanded a majority. 50% of voters and officials had to take the ironclad oath.
The ironclad oath, what did that involve?
It meant swearing you had never supported the Confederacy or fought against the U.S. Think about that.
Wow. So basically impossible for almost anyone who had been involved with the Confederacy.
Precisely. It was designed to exclude them from political life going forward. A much, much tougher standard.
Yeah. That would completely change who held power in the South.
That was the intent. The bill also formally abolished slavery in those states, put penalties on trying to deny freedom, and it disenfranchised anyone who willingly fought for the Confederacy. Stripped citizenship from former Confederate officials, too.
So a total restructuring. What about setting up new governments?
Provisional governors appointed by the feds would oversee creating new state governments, and those new constitutions had to abolish slavery. But here's a key bit. Approval was needed from both the president and Congress.
So Congress gets a much bigger say than in Lincoln's plan.
Much bigger. The radicals wanted congressional control over Reconstruction, not just the president say so. They aimed to reshape the South, punish rebels, and importantly, protect the newly freed population. Some even talked about land redistribution and voting rights.
But Lincoln didn't go for it. He vetoed Wade Davis.
He did. Congress passed it in July '64, but Lincoln used a pocket veto. He didn't sign it after Congress adjourned, so the bill just died.
Why did he do that if the radicals were so insistent?
Well, his reasons were complex. He didn't want to be locked into one single plan while the war was still raging. He still favored a faster, maybe more peaceful path back.
And he had that whole argument about secession being illegal anyway, right? So states didn't technically leave.
Exactly. He questioned the whole premise of states needing to rejoin. Plus, constitutionally, he wasn't sure Congress could just mandate abolishing slavery in states at that point. This was before the 13th Amendment was ratified, remember?
Right. Timing is key there. But Wade and Davis must have been furious.
Oh, absolutely. They issued a manifesto denouncing his veto, accusing him of usurping power. It really laid bare the deep divisions within the Republican Party itself about how to move forward.
So, amidst all this political fighting about plans, the actual legal status of slavery is still being debated even after the Emancipation Proclamation.
Yes, the Emancipation Proclamation was huge, but it was a war measure tied to rebelling areas. People recognized the need for something permanent nationwide.
Which brings us to the 13th Amendment. Passed Congress early 65, ratified by December 65.
And the text is so clear, so powerful. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States. It legally ended slavery everywhere. 4 million people freed.
A truly monumental shift in American law and society.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
But there's that clause.
the exception clause.
Yeah, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted.
That sounds like it could be problematic.
And it was. Hugely problematic later on. This loophole was exploited, especially during Reconstruction itself, through things like the black codes and convict leasing systems.
How so?
Well, these systems basically created ways to arrest black people, often for minor or trumped-up charges, and then sentence them to forced labor. It became, in many ways, a new form of involuntary servitude, tragically echoing slavery.
So the legal end of slavery didn't mean the immediate end of forced labor or exploitation.
Not at all. It shows that legal changes are just one part of the picture. The fight for true freedom was far from over.
That's a sobering point. And then, just as the war ends, this amendment is ratified, the nation is facing this huge task. Lincoln is assassinated, April 1865.
Yes, a devastating blow. John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer. The assassination and the conspiracy around it targeting other leaders, it just fueled Northern anger.
And suspicion towards the South, I imagine.
Tremendously.
Yeah.
And politically, it really strengthened the hand of the radical Republicans. Their arguments for a tougher approach suddenly seemed much more justified to many in the North.
Lincoln's death really changes the whole dynamic.
Completely. It removed that potential for a more lenient reunification, the path Lincoln seemed to favor, and ushered in Andrew Johnson.
Okay, so Vice President Andrew Johnson takes over. Now, initially, didn't he sound like he might be tough on the South?
He did make some noises like that, yeah. Talked about treason being made odious. The radicals might have initially thought he'd be an ally.
But his actual Reconstruction plan turned out differently.
Very differently. It ended up being much more lenient than the radicals wanted, actually quite similar in some ways to Lincoln's approach, pardoning many former Confederates quite easily.
So, not what the radicals had in mind at all.
No. They felt Johnson's policies failed to protect the formerly enslaved and didn't sufficiently punish the Confederate leadership. This set the stage for a major clash.
Between President Johnson and the radical-controlled Congress.
Exactly. A real power struggle. You see Congress passing crucial legislation like the Freedmen's Bureau Bill to help former slaves and the Civil Rights Bill of 1866.
And Johnson vetoed them, right?
He vetoed both, but Congress actually managed to override his veto of the Civil Rights Bill.
That's huge. Overriding a presidential veto on major legislation?
It was the first time it had ever happened. It showed the determination and the strength of the radicals in Congress. They weren't backing down.
And this conflict pushed them towards even stronger measures.
It did. It led directly to the push for the 14th Amendment, which Congress passed in 1866 and was ratified by 1868, although Tennessee was the only ex-Confederate state to ratify it initially.
The 14th Amendment, another cornerstone. What were its key provisions in this Reconstruction context?
Well, first, it established birthright citizenship and guaranteed all persons equal protection of the laws. Hugely important. But it also had specific Reconstruction aims.
Like what?
It said if a state denied voting rights to any adult male citizens, its representation in Congress would be reduced proportionally.
Ah, so a direct incentive to grant black suffrage.
Exactly. Grant black men the vote or lose political power in Washington. It also barred many former Confederate leaders from holding office unless Congress specifically allowed it.
So using the Constitution itself to enforce their vision of Reconstruction.
Precisely. And when most Southern states, encouraged by Johnson, refused to ratify the 14th Amendment initially, the radicals doubled down.
Leading to the Reconstruction Act of 1867.
Yes. This act basically wiped the slate clean for most of the existing Johnson-approved state governments in the South.
Wipe the slate clean? How?
It divided the South, excluding Tennessee, which had ratified the 14th, into 5 military districts, each under a Union general.
Military rule.
Essentially, yes. The military was there to oversee the creation of new state governments, based on constitutions that did guarantee black suffrage, and these states had to ratify the 14th Amendment to be readmitted to the Union. It also disenfranchised many former Confederate leaders again.
So this is Congress really taking control, using federal and military power to enforce its terms on the South.
Absolutely. It's the peak of what we call radical Reconstruction. They were determined to reshape Southern society and ensure black political participation.
And the fight with Johnson got so bad they actually tried to impeach him?
They did. In 1868, they saw him as fundamentally obstructing the will of Congress and the process of Reconstruction.
Why did they impeach him specifically? What were the charges?
The official charges centered around his violation of the Tenure of Office Act, a law Congress had passed, arguably to protect radical allies in his cabinet, like Secretary of War Stanton. Johnson fired Stanton anyway, defying the act.
So it was partly a power struggle over appointments, but really about Reconstruction policy.
Fundamentally, yes. The impeachment was the culmination of that deep conflict over who should control Reconstruction and what its goals should be. He was acquitted by the Senate, but only by a single vote. It was an extraordinary moment.
Truly extraordinary. So looking back at these plans, Lincoln's focus on speed, the radicals' push for fundamental change and rights, Johnson's sort of middle ground that pleased neither side, it's clear there was no easy answer.
Not at all. These weren't just policy disagreements. They were deep, fundamental conflicts over the future of the country. How do you rebuild after such a devastating war? What does freedom actually mean for 4 million newly freed people? What constitutes justice?
Lincoln seemed to prioritize unity above all, perhaps hoping the rest would follow.
Possibly. Well, the radicals believed that unity without justice, without guaranteed rights, wasn't true reunification at all. They were willing to use federal power quite forcefully to try and achieve that.
And the 13th Amendment, while crucial, was clearly just the first step. The debates over the 14th, the Reconstruction Acts, the clashes with Johnson, they show how contested that path forward was.
Exactly. Abolishing slavery was monumental, but defining and securing freedom, citizenship, and equality, that was the incredibly difficult work of Reconstruction and, arguably work that continues today.
So for you, the learner, grasping these different visions, Lincoln's rapid peace, the radicals' insistence on transformation and rights, Johnson's conflicting path, it really helps understand the immense challenges of that era.
And why it matters now. These debates over federal power versus states' rights, the definition of citizenship and equality, how to deal with past injustices, they resonate through American history.
Understanding Reconstruction gives you context for so much that follows.
Absolutely, it's foundational.
So, here's something to think about. If Lincoln hadn't been assassinated, could his approach have worked? Would Reconstruction have been less contentious, maybe more successful in the long run?
Or were the fundamental disagreements just too deep? Was the conflict over race, power, and the South's future inevitable no matter who was president? It really makes you think about how nations heal or don't heal after deep trauma and division.
A powerful question to leave our listeners with. This has been incredibly insightful.
Always a pleasure to dive into this history.